so I just get to sit here and ask questions, which is fun for me.
I'm in the hot seat today.
The hot seat for sure. So before we do that, I just want to take a minute, and this is the 9th swell, which the very first one that was in Toronto. We have come so far from maybe 100 people was in a warehouse on the outskirts of Toronto. But in addition to acknowledging some of the stuff that Ashish pointed out happened overnight, earlier this morning, Ripple announced a $500 million investment led by Fortress and Citadel, some of the biggest names in finance. And so, although we're not talking about that today, at least wanted to acknowledge that so that people are aware that we're not just ignoring it. It is nice to take a moment to see kind of how far we've come. So, Patrick, we're excited to have you here. I was talking to Patrick backstage, and I thought it would be interesting to start because you're sort of new to the role. It's been a few months. Give us your journey. Like, what was your path here? I know you were with the Department of Defense for a minute, but both in government, but even before that, how did you end up in government?
Yeah, so my background was a college football player, very briefly in the
acknowledge
pros
that
with the
so
Saints,
people are aware that we're not just
so,
ignoring it. It is nice to take a moment
to
to see kind of how far we've come.
Part of the law school, and briefly with Credit Suisse as an M&A banker, came out, went to McKinsey. So I was in the business world and had an opportunity, was approached by a friend that had joined Trump 45, the first term, and asked me to come into government. And so I served for the last year of the Trump admin. After that, ran for public office in 2022 with the president's endorsement. And my former boss.
I didn't know that part. Where did you run?
In Georgia.
In Georgia.
Yeah,
very nice.
From Atlanta, Georgia.
Yeah.
And my former boss in the admin, a guy named Mike Regas, who is now the #3 at the State Department, Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources. When things were heating up, getting closer towards the 2024 election, asked me to get back involved if I wanted to rejoin the fight. And so joined the team at AFPI initially, and then we got tapped to be the official transition team. So moved to DC and then down to West Palm Beach where we ran the transition, and was down there from day one, standing everything up. Very exciting experience, nothing quite like it, running a presidential transition.
I can only imagine.
And my colleague, Michael Friedman, who's actually now the Chief of Staff to Secretary Bessent at the Treasury, we kind of divided up the world, of the different agencies. And so he took the economic portfolio because he had worked on the 2016 transition with Treasury, and I took all the NatSec agencies. So I was managing Department of Defense, Department of State, DOJ, the intelligence community. And during that time also, Bo Hines, my close friend and also Yale football player, was down there basically crafting this idea for this office for digital assets within the White House, kind of modeled after what Jared Kushner had done with the Office of American Innovation in Trump 45. And so the plan was for me to join Bo, and we would go in and work under David and stand up that office. Well, as things kind of happen in the initial days of the admin, it takes a little while to get folks on board. And in particular, that White House office needs to run like a top. And so their focus is on the core, right around the president, with all the executive orders that we had drafted up during that time down at West Palm. That was the focus. And so, for me, wanting to start on day one of the admin, the Department of Defense, now Department of War, asked if I would join their beachhead team, rather. So went into the Pentagon on January 20th, was sworn in, about 30 minutes after the president took his oath. And, in short order, got pulled up to the front office of the Undersecretariat of Research and Engineering. So most folks know it because it oversees DARPA and the entire Defense Science and Technology enterprise. So the initial plan to go over to the White House, suddenly I'm in a very important role, the equivalent of a 4-star general within the Pentagon. And so everything got delayed a bit on joining the White House. But, I ended up dual hatting starting in April over to the White House, working under Bo as his deputy, and then officially made the transition to where White House is primary for me. I think, back in late summer is when Bo stepped out.
Awesome. Useful to have that context, I think. As we talk today, and I know we only have limited time, but I think one of the things that I'm curious about is there's an expression, from the Matrix, blue pill, red pill. people who have adopted crypto are on the red pill side. How did you get red pilled? What was your introduction to crypto?
I think the first experience was, I had the opportunity to live abroad, lived for a year in France prior to going to law school. And, the difficulty of having all my assets in a US bank, but living abroad, just really highlighted for me the inefficiencies in the system. And I remember in my first year of law school, my property professor, Kenneth Mack, was telling us about the bundle of sticks, that property rights are made up of. And it's possession, control, enjoyment. I'm sure I'm leaving a few out. And I remember thinking
I'm
to
impressed
myself,
you got the 3.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure there's 1 or 2 others. But I remember thinking to myself, like, is this my money or is it not? If I can't, transfer it to somebody else, then am I really in control if I have to go ask some, central intermediary to basically use my funds in the way that I want to? And, crypto was, very much on the scene at the time, but still this kind of, unknown, arcane concept, but I knew that it promised a better way and a more efficient way to, enjoy my money and, and spend it or transfer it in the way that I wanted to. And so that was kind of my first introductory moment, and then was a regular user ever since, ultimately leading up to this role here in the White House, where I'm helping to shape that policy and helping this industry really achieve its full potential.
So as you think about shaping that policy, obviously there's been a big shift. Give us the report card. How do you feel like, amazingly, it's only been, 9.5 months since Trump was inaugurated, as you pointed out. Obviously, a lot has changed. Give us the report card of, where we are, maybe the good, and, where we still have work to do.
Well, as a former football player, I will say there's always room for improvement. So, maybe I'll give us a B+ or an A-. But I will say, this administration, it starts at the top. President Trump set the clear vision. He reiterated that the other night on 60 Minutes. We want to make the United States the dominant player in the crypto space, right? We've been the dominant player in... And so he sets the direction, and if he's the owner of the team, let's say, then my boss, David Sachs, is the general manager or the head coach, and I'm the quarterback on the field, trying to execute. We've done an incredible job of staffing this administration from Treasury, SEC, CFTC, our office, with folks who are pro-crypto, pro-innovation, and want to do everything that we can to, achieve that efficient frontier of regulation, right? The basic rules of the road that allow markets to flourish but not be overly burdensome, and really put an end to the Gensler war on crypto. I'd say the Gensler-Warren era on crypto. So, Gensler's gone, but we still have to deal with Senator. Still dealing with a number of folks that have that legacy mindset, but I would say the administration is pushing every day to move the ball forward and make sure that we're delivering wins, and again, allowing this industry to just do what it does and achieve its potential. The best thing we can do is get out of the way.
Yeah. One of the things you touched on, there was a session at the end of the day yesterday. Stu Alderodi, our chief legal officer, interviewed Rep. Torres. And there was a conversation about, why is crypto partisan? I've heard you talk a little bit about this, but tell the audience your thoughts on kind of, this has become oddly partisan in my judgment, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this.
I think it really relates back to the terrible stance and the terrible place that Senator Warren and Gary Gensler put Democrats in. They turned it into a political issue. They turned a technology into a political issue that they thought ultimately was the right way to win votes and win elections.
They were wrong.
Yeah, they were terribly wrong on that one. And I would say, just as an objective observer, they really, handed Republicans, and President Trump, an amazing opportunity to kind of seize this mantle and say, there's no need to be anti-technology, anti-progress here. You think a lot of Democrats like to fashion themselves as being, pro-progress and, pro-innovation. Well, they kind of left the crown in the gutter and allowed, the president and Republicans to pick it up. And we were more than happy to, not only because we believe it's, good politics, but it's good policy, and it's pro-American. We are the innovation capital of the world, and we need to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to ensure that innovation takes place here at home. Because I think what you saw during the Biden era is there were a number of folks that believe that if we just kind of bury our heads in the sand and drive this, away, then crypto will go away. That was obviously not the case. It flourished. It just didn't flourish here at home. So We have an opportunity to catch up, and we need to make sure that we got Genius done with stablecoin bill. Market structure is the next one, and we need to leap back into first place in this new era of financial innovation.
Yeah, you just touched on something that was going to be a question later, so I'll hit it real quickly. Ripple obviously has been quite acquisitive. We've done about 6 acquisitions, a couple of big ones. It was interesting as we look back here, during the Biden administration, we couldn't find any big crypto acquisitions. And in Q3 alone, this most recent Q3, we found 95 different crypto acquisitions. And you kind of touched on that, but like, hey, to what do you attribute that in the market shift, obviously, between the Elizabeth Warren-led freeze, if you will, compared to where we are now?
It really does link back to the regulatory certainty. You've got a bunch of players that are kind of looking at this space, unsure if it's safe to get in the pool, and when President Trump comes along, we pass the Genius Act, in short order, we'll pass the market structure bill. I think it's going to touch off, as you mentioned, already it's starting a wave of acquisitions because there's a lot of traditional players that are, interested in getting into this space, and it's a question of, are you going to build it homegrown? Well, that might be difficult. There's plenty of players already in the space who can be the partners. So you're going to see a lot of JVs, the partnerships that Ripple has, announced and will continue to announce, working with others. And then the other, way to get involved in the space is to buy your way in. And so there's going to be a lot more activity, I would say, in the months and years to come.
So I will say, you talked a little bit about the Genius Act getting passed. Huge kudos to your leadership, the White House's leadership on that. I think that, I agree, an unlock for the industry for sure, and really the first major piece of financial legislation since Dodd-Frank, so a big deal. If you look back, what are the learnings from that we can apply to the market structure efforts? Like, what went well, what could have gone better, and how do we, even frankly the community sitting here, learn from that so that we do a better job and get market structure across the finish line?
I think back to a quote that Luke Pettit, who was working on Senator Hagerty's staff and was instrumental in getting Genius passed. He's now over at Treasury as one of the assistant secretaries there. He gave me some great advice when talking about the market structure, battle that we're in right now. He said, this bill is going to have to suffer a few near-death experiences before it finally, survives the surgery here. So it's never as close as, to done as you think it is, but it's also, very few of these actual blow-ups are going to be fatal. We need to keep the train, moving in the right direction. I would say we are close. We've seen a lot of progress from Democrats, very constructive engagement, especially over the past few weeks. And there will be, a number of additional issues that pop up as we drive closer towards the finish line. But I think everyone understands, as we were talking about a moment ago, we're regulating a technology, right? And we're regulating a space that is, for whatever reason, had become partisan, but is really, when we get this bill done and when the crypto industry flourishes, America wins, and Americans, consumers, are going to be offered better products, more efficiently, lower cost. That's a victory for everybody, not just Republicans or Democrats.
Yeah. Does the, Ashish, as he was kicking us off, pointed out, which I'd kind of lost track of, we're now in the longest government shutdown. Does that affect some of the work around the Clarity Act, or what has been called the Clarity Act, or just a market structure bill? I'll be more clear about my words.
It has presented some complications, but I would say in other ways it's actually been helpful in a kind of maybe perverse way. A lot of the meetings that senators would be having have kind of fallen off their calendars. So we've been able to engage with them a lot more and get a lot of time with them and their staffs right now because, some of the other issues have kind of fallen away. I will tell you that, from our office, I haven't noticed, hardly any difference. We're at it morning until night every day, and we're continuing to make a lot of progress during this time. But, folks that get furloughed, for example, CFTC detailees that were over on the Hill working on this bill, some Republicans, some Democrats, them being furloughed has set things back. Right. In terms of providing that technical expertise. But overall, it's
still moving forward.
Full steam ahead.
All right, good. Shifting gears for a moment. So I was just over in Saudi Arabia for the FII event, and as you might guess, lots of conversations about crypto. The tenor of a lot of these major players has gone from leaning out, particularly U.S., to leaning in. I read somewhere that there's more than 50% of asset managers, financial institutions still don't have any exposure to crypto. When you think about if you were giving advice to what I'll call those laggards, what would you tell them today that might change their posture going forward?
I think it's somewhat of a fundamental misunderstanding of what crypto is, or blockchain rather. Cryptocurrency is one application of blockchain technology. And so, Ripple and others that are building the financial infrastructure for this new crypto economy that is built on top of it, view those more as companies, in the crypto space. But blockchain overall, you have Bitcoin, commodities, there are other stores of value. It's not a monolith, right? There are plenty of companies in this space that are building the infrastructure for this financial future. And pretty quickly, they're going to start to understand that, Bitcoin is not XRP, is not, name your other token out there. And they're, depending on the asset manager, they're going to find their places where they want to have exposure. Do they want to be exposed to the companies that are building that financial future? Do they want to be, exposed to, Bitcoin, Ethereum, others? But I think you'll see that number. I think 50% that aren't, exposed to, it's going to dwindle. I think, year over year.
I think you're absolutely right there. One of the things we hear, and frankly, you have even coached our team, is that there's a lot of people in Washington who still really don't understand crypto. And even as you're just commenting, what are the things that you feel like industry players, whether they be the Ripples of the world and corporates, or even just enthusiasts, what can we do to better bring education to DC? What's advice for us of how we can be supportive of the efforts that you're leading in the White House?
I think it is meeting the members and the policymakers where they are. For folks in this space that are steeped in these issues and understand them, down to the level of nuance that is really encapsulated within them. And then you have, various senators who might be from a different generation or, not as, savvy or just.
It is kind of age-based sometimes, is my own experience.
It is for sure. But we need their votes too, and we need their policy decisions as well. And so we need to avoid, talking down to those folks or getting impatient with them because they might not be as savvy or fluent in the issues. And, again, meet them where they are, help educate them. They're not going to be cryptographers, and coders, but what does this technology do? How does it compare to existing markets? And really de-risking, the decisions that they're making by introducing, crypto into the financial system. Because, it's concerning anytime you introduce a new technology if you don't fully understand it. We need to make sure that we are appropriately educating them and making sure that they understand, this is a good thing, and we're putting in place the appropriate safeguards to make sure that it does integrate well into the system.
One of the things I'm sure you have seen, particularly, I think you do have a difficult job in some ways, not just because you have to go champion things on Capitol Hill, but you also are dealing with a breadth of industry. There's still a lot of tribalism in crypto. My own view is that has the trend line there is it's getting better, and that people are more recognizing it's not a zero-sum game, and we can support the whole industry. How do you deal with the tribalism, and how do you see, what's your own experience in the White House of kind of when that happens, or how do you manage through that? Oh, as well as on Capitol Hill, you see some tribalism of elected officials.
For sure. I would say, speaking, for the industry players in particular, I think back to, I don't know if it was apocryphal, but Benjamin Franklin's, quote that, we're either going to hang together or we're all going to hang separately. Maybe that's poor, gallows humor there,
dark,
but,
a little dark.
Folks need to stick
together.
Death
was on the line.
Yeah, no, it's life or death. But no, understanding that, coming together, no one's going to get 100% of what they want. It's not going to be anyone's perfect bill. It's not going to be Republicans' perfect bill. It's not going to be Democrats' perfect bill or policy decision. Getting to 80% yes, which is really where the industry is, I feel like, on a lot of these issues. There's a lot more, overlap and consensus than folks might otherwise think. Making sure that they understand that, getting the best deal that we can. There are going to be improvements over time. We're not going to get this perfectly right. If you were, drafting a piece of legislation for the internet in the late 90s. Would you have predicted everything and gotten everything exactly
not.
right?
Yeah.
So establish the guardrails, establish the basic safeguards, achieve that efficient frontier of regulation that allows this industry to thrive and flourish. But leave some play in the joints, because there's going to be a lot of surprises, things that are going to surprise you and me over the next few decades here. And so that's the mission, and that would be success with this.
We're running out of time here, but I'll kind of wrap things up with a couple things. One, you are in a very interesting seat. You're seeing lots of things. I think it would have been difficult, as you just described, to predict certain outcomes of how the internet has evolved. And the Telecom Dereg Act clearly didn't think of everything, but yet here we are with you can, on demand, use a mobile device over IP networks to have ice cream delivered on stage, probably. Sounds kind of good, but I'm curious. You make a prediction or two. It could, whether it's policy based. I guess maybe I'll try to put you on the spot and predict when will we get a market structure bill through. But also, I'm curious on your kind of crypto predictions more broadly. And I realize I'm putting you on the spot. That's a hard thing to know given everything's been shut down and what have you. But you guys are doing good work there, and I think I'm an optimist. So.
Yeah.
Anyway, predictions for the industry.
I think as far as the market structure bill goes, we are maintaining, before the end of the year, the president wants that piece of legislation on his desk, so we're continuing to apply pressure, having regular meetings. I spend most of my time on Capitol Hill these days, meeting with senators from both sides of the aisle to get that done. I'm optimistic that we've seen enough progress recently to where the trend line is moving in the right direction, and I think we're going to get a good piece of legislation done and over to the president for signature in short order.
We heard it here. By the end of the year, we're in.
There you go. And the other thing I would say, maybe I'll take an easy out. I'm not going to predict, I'm
not going to be the hard-charging interviewer.
Yeah,
I've been on the receiving end too many times.
Yeah, right. I would just say the future is very bright for this industry, and there are companies that are going to sprout up here in the space that probably aren't even in existence yet. And there's going to be just amazing, efficiencies unlocked. It's going to integrate into the existing financial system. Stable coins are going to proliferate around the globe. So I think you're going to be talking about, market cap into the, tens of trillions, even beyond what it is right now at, 4 or 5 trillion. So, there's going to be growth. There's going to be a lot of innovation in the space, and there's going to be a lot of players that come into existence that aren't even, concepts right now.
Yeah. Well, look, Patrick, truly an honor to have you here. You guys have been doing incredible work out in the White House, so we appreciate you taking the time today, and thank you for what you're doing in the White House. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Patrick, we're excited to have you here. Everything's been shut down and what have you, but